In today's video, we're going to be taking a look here at the current conditions and also that potential snowstorm somewhere in the eastern United States. There's a lot to talk about with that one, actually. A lot of changes on the models that we need to talk about today. There will be cold in place for multiple days, but definitely there's a tight window there that storm has to hit very perfectly to become a major snowstorm. We're going to be talking about what has to happen for that to occur and what could go wrong. Now, we're taking a look at these current conditions, and as you can see, we have snow showers, some rain showers in lower elevation areas here across the Rockies, but primarily we're seeing snow showers for a lot of these areas here. We can see our next storm system moving onshore to the northwest there, and then we can see a nor'easter kind of has a upper level low here too. Up to the north, we see two low pressure systems here, kind of pretty close together, and this is creating a bit of precipitation, pretty spotty throughout the northeast and southeast regions of Canada. Let's work our way from west to east, though. We can see a very strong low here offshore with a cold front, warm front setup. And this is starting to bring some precipitation onshore to the northwest here. And we're just going to take a look at these different areas. We could see some snowfall for the Olympic mountain range that is warming up as there is a warm front approaching here. And this is creating some light to moderate rainfall across these northwest regions. As we work our way a little bit further southward towards northern California, we could see a pocket of showers moving across the northern regions of the valley there. Warm front coming onshore here to the areas where California and Oregon borders there near the coast. And we actually have some moderate precipitation moving very close, and that will be moving onshore a little bit later today. Now, as we take a look across the Rockies, again, there's a couple of weaker lows across this region. As you can see, kind of 3 or 4 of them happening here. Pretty much broad low pressure, though, is what we can expect in here. And this is creating some snowfall showers, again, up and down the Rocky Mountain range. Rainfall perhaps in the very low elevation areas, but for the most part, mostly snowfall as you'd expect here for the Rockies during the winter time. As we work our way further east, I'm just checking for any areas of precipitation. We do have some very, very light showers across portions of the Great Lakes and Ohio Valley. Maybe not even making it to the ground here, I would say. As we take a look at the northeast, it does look like this is becoming a little bit of a weaker nor'easter system. We see some heavier precipitation moving nearby this low. We also, again, have this stronger low up to the north, and we see this is creating a lot of this flow, which tells you it is actually probably the stronger of the two. Here we see this circulating around this low here. So this is bringing some colder air with it. We do see some of this precipitation moving onshore from this weaker low underneath. And what kind of becomes of this is mostly rain or mixed showers here across a lot of the western and southern regions here. But as we work our way towards the eastern United States, you can see snowfall occurring for New England, Massachusetts, even near Boston, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. They're all seeing light, moderate, and even heavy snowfall here. In the grays, we're expecting lighter snowfall to be occurring. The whites are going to be your more heavy areas. And then these blues in here, like we see for Massachusetts, if it's not mixed and it's fully snowfall, would be whiteout conditions. And we're seeing a lot of that across the I-91 valley there in central regions of Massachusetts. Also, the more mountainous regions just to the east of that valley, we see underneath kind of the White Mountains, kind of south of Keene, New Hampshire there. This pocket seems to usually do really well in snowfall events here. This corridor right in here seems to do really well during snowfall events for New England. We can see some heavier bands setting up over these regions just to the west of Boston. Boston, matter of fact, is mostly rainfall, maybe starting to mix with some snowfall, but it does appear like they are going to switch over to snowfall. As we can see, that rain snow line is receding further and further eastward here. Areas in coastal northern Massachusetts already starting to see some snowfall mix in at points, and this is just going to work its way a little bit further south as the day progresses and as this trough, this miniature trough, starts to move in further. We can see that there is a pretty good amount of heavier precipitation moving in, so they could get multiple hours of moderate to heavy snowfall, maybe even picking up a dusting or a few inches there. Would be interesting to see. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and move on and focus in on the upcoming pattern where, again, there is a couple of interesting storm signals, but especially this potential southern slider or nor'easter that really is going to be a hit or miss system. It's either going to miss big or it's going to hit big, and we're going to talk about all of the different factors going into that storm. Now, as we begin tracking the upcoming pattern, I just want to continue on with this. We are going to be tracking this 8th, 9th time frame for a potential minor storm system across the eastern regions of the United States. And there is still differing opinions on this, which is interesting because we are obviously extremely close to this storm occurring, and there still is quite a bit of difference between each and every model, which means uncertainty in the short range, which is obviously not what we want, but it is what we have. So we're just going to try to dissect it as best as possible here. We do see a bit of a trough moving into the eastern United States. It's pretty flat, pretty minor, and the cold will be marginal at best, which means mixing issues, potential for mostly rain, I guess, and maybe a little bit of snowfall. It's just cold enough to where we have to consider snowfall. It makes it very, very difficult. It's much easier when it's very cold and we know there will be snowfall, or it's very warm and we know there won't be. But when it's right on the fence like it makes it very, very difficult. And we can see the 8th. Here we have, and I'll zoom into the east here just to make it a little bit easier. This might actually switch our model run. There, it didn't. Wait, no, it did. Okay. We have to switch back to the 0Z. That's really annoying. We do see that there is some mixing and snowfall happening on the front end here. Very, very difficult when we have a scenario like this, where there's a bit of a warm layer here in between, and then snowfall on the eastern end, the front end of things. Again, this warm layer here, this little kink in the temperature line, makes things extremely complicated. And that moves up into about the Pittsburgh area here, some of these eastern regions of Ohio as well, seeing some of that, and then across the central and western regions of West Virginia. Those are the pockets where we see this warmer temperature. We see this snowfall reaching all the way down to some of these Appalachian regions of Virginia, all the way up through Winchester, the very northern tip there of Virginia, near D.C., Baltimore, Philadelphia. Philadelphia is kind of out of the precipitation field here, but regardless, they would be very close to that, being in snowfall at least. Richmond is very close also to the snow rain line here to begin things out, but as we move on with this, you see it warms up substantially. And then we see mostly just snowfall for these areas that typically see it in these types of events. Very, very rough mixing issues here across the northern extent of this storm. And mostly this is just a rainstorm. We do see this becomes a bit of a coastal storm, so it's a shame. If we had deeper cold, this would be a nice little snow event, but it really just struggles to be that as we get mostly accumulations in these areas. We'll take a look at that real quickly here. And again, we will have to revert this back from our... No, we won't. Okay, so we're just on the 0Z here. So since this is a mixed storm, anywhere in the grays is a dusting, if anything, so take it with a grain of salt. There is a lot going on. Ignore all this up here because that's all from a different storm that's happening right now, as we saw. But we can see potentially 2 to 6 inches of snowfall in these blue regions. So mostly these very tall mountainous regions in Pennsylvania, Maryland, and West Virginia. And then across the northern and central regions of Pennsylvania, we do get maybe 1 inch to 2, maybe even 3 in a lot of these areas. So certainly some potential there. We will take a look at some other models in a little bit. But that is what we're dealing with for now. And that's kind of my rough overview of that system according to the European model at least. Now what we're tracking next is around the 10th, a more major storm system moving in through the west, the one the hurricane hunters moved into actually. Very heavy snowfall for the Sierra Nevadas and some of these other mountainous regions as well. And we're going to see this one move across the nation, eventually threaten to be a southern slider or nor'easter here by the time we're reaching the kind of 12th through 14th time frame. Now, this is when things get really, really complicated for this storm. I don't want to get too technical here, but we start to see a bit of a ridge building out west. And this is usually good for snow in the east, cold and snow in the east. We see this very strong high pressure system here. This is right around the 12th Thursday. We need this to be in place when the storm is offshore over here. This, in my opinion, this is where, you kind of move away from models and you move more into experience. And that's why having a forecaster with experience is important. Not really patting myself on the back there, but this is all the type of stuff that you need time and knowledge to build this kind of just information based. This is all in the brain, right? This has nothing to do with computer models anymore at this point. But just knowing that this needs to be here and this needs to be here for it to line up. There is just not enough cold. Similar to the 8th, 9th time frame system, there's also going to be pretty marginal cold for this system as well. I think we're all kind of writing the cards that at this point January is going to be a warmer month overall. It already has been thus far, and it appears like for the most part this is going to be a warm winter month. Now that has nothing to do with February, March, and this still could be a very cold and snowy winter. And December definitely had its action. Um, Now January, as we're taking a look at the medium to just narrowly long range, it does appear warm. Um, these are the little tiny opportunities that you get in warm winter months. So this is all kind of expected in this type of a pattern. We see this ridge building even further up, and now we're starting to see this action here, okay, right? The trough is moving in. So look at it like a teeter-totter, right? So when we have a ridge, we have this pushing up, but for the most part, it's this pushing down here, right? And this is the balance beam. So what we're going to see is in this scenario, if we put the balance beam here, we see it's obviously doing this, right? It's tilting in this direction. We're pushing up here, and this equally is pushing down because this warmth is pushing and the cold is pushing down. I hope that doesn't get too confusing. And equally, we have a storm system moving through. All of this has to happen at the right time because the cold is going to be like the blink of an eye. It's going to happen so quickly. There's going to be maybe a 12 to 24-hour window where cold and snow is going to be possible along the southeast and the mid-Atlantic and northeast in general. And if it misses that window, then it's going to be a rainstorm. But it has to hit that window so perfectly that this storm is a low odd event. But we have seen the models trending at it hitting perfectly at times. This scenario is not that scenario. We see this storm system moving through here. This is going to bring a trough, which is going to end this ridge right here. We see the ridge out there, which in turn is going to cause this cold, because again, the teeter-totter, right? Right now we're like this. If this starts to move into a trough, what we're going to see is things even back out, and eventually they will be doing this, where warmth is going to be pushing back up here because the cold is pushing this down like this. Very, very quickly, all of this is going to happen. So we see the storm moving in, and this is right here is the time frame that I've kind of noted the storm needs to be hitting to really end up being anything. Okay, so by 8 p.m. here on Friday the 13th, or 0Z, according to the models here, Saturday, January 14th, our low needs to be off the southeast coast by this point, in my opinion, to end up being an East Coast snowstorm, either a nor'easter or southern slider, depending on a lot of different things. Because we have this storm system moving into the west here, this is again going to end that ridge. So this ridge is right at the end of its peak here. There is enough cold air. It has to be hitting then. And what we see is if that doesn't happen, we see the trough moving in here with cold and snowy conditions. And this trough is quickly moving out, and we see a ridge building into the east already by Sunday morning, the 15th, which is when this European model has the low offshore. And as you can see, rainfall. That's it. That's what happens if it doesn't hit perfectly. We get this big rainstorm for the southeast if it hits on the 15th, 16th time frame. And then we're left with this pattern, right? Big trough in the west, huge ridge out east, and this is what we're left with. Clearly no room for a snowstorm here if this occurs this way, and then cold moving into the west. We do get plenty of snowfall with this event, and in general a very large storm out west, again with lots and lots of snowfall for different states, as you can see. Now, kind of just to reiterate the timing here, this is the pattern we're in. We can see a more southern jet bringing some storminess here, so we see that right there. Our northern jet diving down here, and then we see, in general, this trough over the eastern United States, better yet. So for the most part, this is more of a ridge pattern out west. There is a bit of a trough in the east. We move into a much softer pattern here, as you can see, all the way through the 8th, 9th. Here's that miniature trough, right? So we have another one moving out west, ridge here, trough, just like that. So right around the 8th, 9th, 10th time frame, again, there is this opportunity where there will be cold air moving into the east here with a miniature trough, but already this ridge is building in. So that window is very short. And then what happens is we get this right there, as you can see, this is that point that I marked right there, right at 0Z Saturday, the 14th, the low needs to be right here, because look at how extreme this ridge is, and then the trough here in the east. This is the only time frame that we can really support snowfall happening in these areas because of how extreme that trough is. By the time the European model has this storm hitting here on the 15th, as you can see, it's just a mess. There's a trough out west. The balance is all thrown off, and there's not really any deep Arctic air or really freezing air in the eastern United States here. We get a much flatter look here with the jet stream, and it's just not looking like it's anything that supports a large snowstorm at all at this point. Now, the GFS model, we're going to move through this quickly. We do get a little bit more of some more moderate to heavy snowfall here around the 9th time frame. So this one has more snowfall with that system. Let's just take a look at that real quick. This video I can already tell is going to be extremely long, but I hope that's okay. As we take a look at the total snowfall, we can see much more blues going on. Well, this is, again, we're Xing this out. I forgot for a minute there. 2 to 6 inches of snowfall, perhaps as far south as Baltimore and as far north as Philadelphia here on this model. So a huge difference right away. Flakes flying in DC, not much accumulating though. So we do get a moderate snowfall event, light to moderate snowfall event. Probably everybody in there that is a snow lover will take this at this point with how this winter has gone. But basically, there's a little bit more happening here than the European model. So let's just move back and let's take a look at the rest of this model run. Oh, that's the wrong one. Here we go. As we continue things on, we reach about the 11th time frame, the 12th, 13th here, and look at what we get here on the the GFS model. We see that ridge and then the trough here. And again, I marked this as the date that the low needs to be offshore, and we do have broad low pressure, but it's all off the southeast coast here right at this point, 8 p.m. on Friday, which will be 0Z Saturday on the models. We see the cold air. There's enough of it around to support some snowfall. We're already seeing some of that here for the Ohio Valley and Northeast here. As we continue things on, we see that develops into a nor'easter, and we get a much more major snowfall event here, especially than what the European model is showing, which is nothing. For the 13th, 14th, and 15th, things warm up, and it's mostly the front end where we see snowfall with that. But as we take a look at the total snowfall according to this model, we see a lot of it. We're going to be seeing 2 to 6 inches of snowfall there in the blues. The purples will be 6 to 10, pinks 10 to 20, and then your pastels will be 20 inches plus. So certainly 10 to 20 inch event at least here on the GFS model. And then the European is a nothing burger basically. So big difference, and it's especially based on the timing. So I hope that kind of proves my point that I've been hammering home this whole video. Let's just take a look at the positioning at 8 p.m. on Friday like we did yesterday. So again, GFS model is there on the yellow. It's pretty broad, but it is there. And then the European model is like here. So that's where the Euro is at that point, where again, it needs to be offshore in my opinion by this point. The GEFS model is maybe a little bit further north than the deterministic GFS model, but it's very close. And then in the purple, we'll do the European ensemble model, which is going to be maybe a little bit further west than that deterministic GFS model. But if you can kind of take note here, if you watched yesterday's video, we have a lot more ensemble support in here with GFS model than the European model that seems to be an outlier, which if you watched yesterday's video is the complete opposite of what we saw yesterday, where the European model was where the GFS model shows it, and all the ensemble models were there, and now the European model is the one kind of swaying away from what the ensemble support is showing. Now, the interesting thing is that the ensemble models all still have this same support that they had yesterday. The ensemble models have held true to what they were calling for. So moving forward, I'm going to put a lot more I'm going to put a lot more faith here in these ensemble models because they've been staying true to what they've been showing the entire time. It's the deterministic models that are jumping all over the board, all over the place. And it makes me kind of nervous to try to lock down a scenario using that rather than the ensemble models, which have moved maybe by 20 miles, max over a 24-hour period, whereas the European model and the GFS model have been jumping all over the eastern United States. Definitely these ensemble models here have been showing a more consistent solution. So putting a lot more faith here. Again, this is the perfect setup. Really, this is when we have the ingredients there for snowfall, especially in this corridor here, where it'll be cold enough during this time period. Maybe even you could say that it's going to be this far north. It just depends on how marginal or extreme that cold is. There is almost 200 hours to go until this storm would be starting out, so there is time for more cold to move in, and it's a little bit more snowy perhaps if it's there on time, right? We're still considering that as well. Or it could get warmer and really do away with any potential for snowfall. There's enough time for really anything to change, and that's why we're going to take it with a grain of salt. But certainly, the ensemble support has been there, and we're going to continue to track this daily. So be sure to subscribe as we do upload every single day, and I can't wait to track this storm over the coming 10 days or so until it is arriving. Again, don't get too excited yet. Don't prepare yet, really. It's too early for that. But over the coming days, continue to watch it closely, and we will kind of lock this thing down over the next 5 days, hopefully, and have a much, much more consistent look at what to expect. You can even hit the bell icon for daily notifications so you don't miss an upload. Also, like the video if you did enjoy it, leave a comment down below, and I will see you guys in the next video.